Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nello Reads channel. Our first ProRevenge story of the day comes from Amendiel. I was unemployed, this guy scammed me, revenge is still pouring on him. First and foremost, this didn't happen in the US. Some events might be pursuable up there, but down here, it was mostly no man's land regarding the kind of scams I fell for. My wife is a nurse. Back then, in the early 2000s, she worked in an ICU of a relatively exclusive, and therefore expensive, hospital. Specifically, she had to care for patients that had undergone cardiac surgery. At the same time, I was working for a small company that was going out of business. The owners were retiring, we hadn't secured any important contracts lately, and in my country, you have to pay for employees' severance unless you file for bankruptcy. So they decided to shut down while they still had enough cash to pay our severances. One day, my wife calls me and tells me about this gentleman in his late 50s that had been on the verge of passing away. After that close call, he was so grateful. We'll call him Benny Lowy. This gentleman happened to work in electronic imports, which gave him access to incredibly convenient deals. Long story short, he was so grateful he could sell us an LCD TV, a store demo unit that had been used just once, and we'd need to pay like 1/4 of its retail price, as long as we kept quiet because he was risking his relationship with the brand. It caught me off guard. I said yes, and she paid. Anyway, the only TV in the house was a wedding present, and weighed over 100 pounds. We were eager to replace it. I was naive, I know, but I thought being her patient, she knew all this guy's personal data, so it seemed unlikely he would target her for a scam. His father was also a known businessman. Now retired and approaching his 80s, Mr. Lowy Sr. was well respected in his community and wouldn't have let his son wreak havoc. Also, my wife had acquaintances in common with Benny's brother, a known doctor at another hospital. Christmas was approaching. She asked Benny, who had already been discharged and back home, for advice regarding the present she wanted to give me. A phone. He hooked her up with the best she could think of. Now, I can't remember the exact model, but it was a Sony flagship and it wasn't yet offered by local carriers. He had access to it because of his status as local representative for said brand. She went with it and paid. The job position. I've said my employer was shutting down, so just for the sake of it, she asked Benny if he knew of someone needing an IT guy. Of course, he said. I'll meet your husband at this place tomorrow, etc. And there I was, in a gas station uptown. He pulled up in a luxury car. Mr. Lowy was a normal looking guy, used a cane, and had a noticeable knee or hip pain. We sat down in the gas station coffee shop, and he told me about a mid-management position, reporting to him in a mining company I had barely heard about. He coached me on what I should say in the upcoming job interview, and we spoke about salary. I was dazzled. Wait, mining? Didn't you say he was into imports? He was that kind of guy you can't pause to question, because he'd already thrown something extra into the mix, and this position had a better paycheck than the one I was being laid off from. In the next few days, we had a few phone calls, and stuff looked promising. I had already been laid off at this point. We agreed he'd pick me up on December 24th, and he'd introduce me to senior managers as the recommended help desk junior manager. I woke up extra early, put on my best suit, and waited in the front yard. Hours went by. I had planned to be back before noon to arrange stuff for that night's dinner because my parents were coming over. After calling him repeatedly, he told me he had been assaulted and robbed. They took my cane and broke it on my knee, he wailed. Poor guy. I told him to forget about my interview for the time being. No, I promised you, I'll make it up to you. Of course, since he had been injured, he wasn't able to deliver the items my wife bought from him. That night, my mother asked me about the new job. I could not bring myself to tell her about the delay. I told her it was going fine. That night, I Googled Benny. Nothing showed up, except for some awards in the Imports and Customs Associations of whatever. He called me to reschedule our interview, December 31st. Again, picture me in my best suit outside my house on a summer morning. Of course, he didn't show up. When I finally reach him, he tells me that when his car had been stolen last week, they took his wallet too, which these thugs eventually dropped during another robbery. So now he had been detained as a suspect for that. He hadn't been able to pick up the imported electronics at the customs office, so they had them moved to another custody unit where it would take a couple of weeks to retrieve. That night, we went to my parents for New Year's Eve, and my mother asked about the new job again. "It's all fine," I said. I Google him again, this time with variations regarding his name or the supposed company he was setting me into. Not much showed up, nothing shady. The next call was like a week later. He told me that because he was being involved in a police investigation, this mining company had fired him. But this was actually good, because now I was going to be interviewed to take his position as IT manager. This meant double my former paycheck and securing a position that would be a leap forward in my career. So I don't ask many questions. I was just grateful. All those delays in the end would pay off. This situation, as you have already figured out, went on and on for weeks. My interview never happened. The electronics never arrived. We had lost our money, our time, our Christmas, our hopes, and I was still unemployed and hadn't been applying for job offers since I had this one allegedly secured. I texted him somewhere in between, "Why are you doing this to us?" He texted back, "If I wanted to, you have nothing on me. But if you stick with me, you'll be rewarded tenfold." Cue in the detective. Time went by. Eventually, my wife overheard a coworker talking about this patient in another hospital she was working at. Some nurses do part-time work at other hospitals. She had fallen for it too, but her husband was a detective. So, a few hours later, we were filling him in with the details of the scam we fell for. Asking around, he found a third nurse scammed by this guy. Soon enough, he was detained, this time for real, and admitted to have been scamming people due to an impromptu invented mild dementia. This detective talks him into an off-court deal, in which he gives us back every cent, but not my time nor hopes, in exchange for us not pursuing any legal action. This was a decent deal, because having failed to make a written agreement on any of these purchases, we had at most a week to claim our money. By the way, the money with which he paid us, he had to borrow from his father, and some from his brother, the doctor. Remember, this didn't happen in the US. This agreement is actually completely legal down here. I couldn't go for any further legal action, but there wasn't a non-disclosure agreement or anything, and I thought, what could prevent other people from falling for this scammer's lies? Well, perhaps some Google results. I was in a unique position to tell my story without risking legal backlash, so I created a blog on WordPress. Think something like BennyLoeyTheScammer.wordpress.com. It was a single post in third person telling my story. The site's admin, me, of course, closing words were, "Has it happened to you?" In the following days, that post's comments had a dozen stories, much like mine. For each comment that deserved to be a story of its own, with due permission from its author, I turned these to a post with a brief intro, a testimony from Javiera from X City. Each one eventually had comments and so on. Since civil action court filings, as opposed to criminal courts, are public in my country, you can dig into ongoing class actions and recent settlements. I found out 7 years later, he tried suing the contact for WordPress.nml, our local fictional TLD, on the grounds of undermining existing past and potential activity for the plaintiff. I'd say that part is true. To this day, if you Google for Benny Loey, that blog will be the first result. It has been for the last 15 years. The case, of course, was dropped, but he took it to appeals and then to Supreme Court. There is another entry filed under a different local court which was promptly dismissed. There was also a third suit. It was filed by his former lawyer, to whom he hadn't paid for the formal civil actions. I was tempted then and there to set a post on this blog saying, "You have nothing on me." However, I have never attempted to let him know who's doing this. And, you know, I feel sorry for him. But every time I consider taking the blog down, I log in again, today I did after 4 years, and see he's still doing it. Those comments I turned into posts, of course. Even knowing that I'm legally covered, the fact that I haven't ever been contacted tells me he's done this to so many people he wouldn't know where to start. All of his victims, or scam targets, are people in vulnerable moments of their lives, or a rough patch. Unemployed guys, small startups looking for an angel investor, small branch salespeople pursuing a promising commission. Those who have, in time, reached a compensation or agreement, it's because Benny's now ancient father had to chip in. From what they say, his brother has gone no contact, but it's still the one they go to before suing. Most of the commenters leave their email addresses, and I have known of a few that have teamed up with each other and succeeded in legal actions. But even if they haven't, they have a place to rant, and their rants are still the first result in Google if you look for him. Edit for clarification, so common questions aren't lost in comments. This guy's father was well respected by the Jewish community, but had by this point disowned Benny. He chipped in to bail him out from jail, as did his brother, or to spare him from jail when an agreement was at hand. In my case, it seems the cashier check we finally cashed in was in the name of his father. But it's not like old Mr. Lowy involved himself in any conflict his son would come to. Just to mention one of Lowy's scams that took place after mine, he lied his way up to being hired as chief academic officer for an IT engineering career in a small but prestigious university. In that position, according to testimonies, he pulled off 2 big scams. He acquired expensive equipment, think Silicon Graphics mainframes, acting on the university's behalf. These rigs never even came to the school. Besides, the school didn't even need such a powerful machine. Eventually, when providers expected for the invoices to be paid, the first units weren't even disputed by the university. But as those invoices kept coming, things blew up. Additionally, he had been charging his students an average $100 fee to set them up for some kind of training, either in Windows usage or Office usage and the likes, that turned out to be free programs sponsored by our local government. Of course, one fine day, he left without a trace. In that position, he then contacted an old childhood friend, just to ask how he was and if there was anything he needed help with. This guy was in a rough patch, divorced, living from his savings, and struggling to pay for his son's college. But hey, this kid wanted to be in the IT field, so of course, this time the scam was a never-ending and convoluted way to make his son slip through the university tuition benefits programs so he would get a full paid scholarship. Rest assured, given how costly tuition can be, this guy had to give Lowy money to pay for documents to be put on top of the pile, or if something was missing, to make it pass unnoticed. Again, one day, he just ghosted him, but not before telling him, "It seems I crossed the line in trying to help you. I was fired from the university, and they are suing me for trying to promote your kid's application for full scholarship benefit. I'll need to fly low for a time." And that's where the story ends. Now, a lot of you listening might be thinking, who is this guy? This sounds just like too insane to be real. I'm not going to link it here, but somebody in the comments did find the real website full of stories about this guy. Obviously, it's with a different name from the one used in the story, so you can't actually just find it on Google unless you know the real name. Anyway, the site is actually still active, and the latest post was from just a month or 2 ago. So yes, unfortunately, people this evil do exist, so be careful out there, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's story, and I'll see you next time.